Well, the biscuits that give you, they say I'm mighty fine. One rolled off a table and it killed a pal of mine. I don't want no more harm me life. Be bad, I want
Yeah, I'm good on the stairs.
Over the past few decades, virtual reality and even mixed reality have been used in various forms within military and police training regimens. In this time, they've found their niches and planted roots there, in the places where they're most effective. Those places include, as we've seen before, vehicle training, notably those of higher risk and cost like airplanes and helicopters. As we also know, VR excels as a learning tool when it comes to practicing procedures. With advancements in motion control and handheld manipulators, you'll also find plenty of examples of it being used to practice the steps in deploying and operating specialized equipment like fancy Illico boxes or whatever the heck this is. 2 people will get that joke. Something that VR is not used for by these armed forces is weapons training. The often cited cause is the lack of feedback. In my opinion though, despite the precision of modern ballistic simulations and the virtual depictions of mechanics of guns, yes, even those present in today's commercial video games, being at a similar level of realism to what we're seeing with driving sims, the fact that there's already infrastructure in place to train with weaponry in controlled and safe environments, aka firing ranges, means that there hasn't been much reason to invest here. Instead, the most common applications within military and police settings for the kind of commercial VR that most people are familiar with are, as you could probably guess, programs that cover some of the most intense situations these people could ever find themselves in, those that can't easily be recreated in a real-world setting without putting participants at risk. Things that prior to VR there wasn't really an effective way to train against, at least not in a standardized way or one that could scale. The classic example is that of the active shooter or attacker scenario. Simulators are used to recreate the environment and conditions of some of the highest urgency cases that you basically can't experience immersely until they actually happen, each one a case study that nearly informs for the next one. I have been plugged into this stuff, not literally, but figuratively, for a while. This is a really unique and specialized application of one of my favorite technologies. Having seen these sims develop from their infancy to the next-gen, hauntingly realistic programs deploying today, ones fit with systems-driven simulative quote-unquote gameplay and scenario/level editors that police departments around the world are using, I don't know if I've ever seen anything else so complex improve so much in such a short amount of time. This is really impressive. I guess those budgets really are something, huh? Armed Forces training simulators like this are being implemented for the same reasons other VR training is. Real skills can be developed in immersive experiences, and the feelings of presence and body ownership can help condition a trainee, whether it be for police operations like first response or real-deal boots-on-the-ground warfighting. While firearms use is a part of these sims, it's not specifically what they're learning. The real practice here is for something less concrete. It's for tactics and strategies. The firearms, their functions and feedback are just part of the fucking assload of sensory input they get from running a scenario like this. Especially when run in multiplayer with the rest of their team, police departments and the companies that build these systems argue that sufficient time in the sim, just like for fighter pilots, should give them an edge in the real world. The sim, its adaptability, and the virtually unlimited time they have to spend in it, no pun intended, may allow them to master their skills and teamwork.
Street Smarts VR is a virtual reality-based training system for law enforcement and first responders. So imagine in 5 years, every officer throws on the headset, goes through training that mimics the real world, so that way when they're out on the street, they're not surprised, they're not shocked, everything's cool, calm, collected. They've seen it before, and they can anticipate things and de-escalate as necessary.
In the case of soldiers, they can even rehearse for specific missions. The argument is that the regular use of these simulators can help them keep their composure and work as a cohesive unit when urgency strikes.
I feel like I know this terrain. Wasn't it in the VR training?
Nikita Weapon Mode, Level 4. Did you recognize it?
Oh, so that was another rehearsal for this mission.
No, a simulation. Not the same thing as a rehearsal. Leverage the experience from your VR training writing. A perfectly real VR experience is in itself an accomplished result. Have confidence in your abilities.
The closer the sim can get to feeling like a genuine recreation of reality, the better in terms of learning, which is why programs like this now support replica service weapons with actual, albeit reduced, kickback in place of out-of-the-box Oculus or Vive controllers. The studies of VR as a learning platform for police have already shown that it outperforms classroom settings for some tasks, and we know about VR's effectiveness in other training contexts. Still, not much objectively is known about the effectiveness of VR active shooter or combat training, because there's no way to ethically reproduce the sorts of scenarios they depict under measure. But I think that in the absence of any significant factor that differentiates this from other forms of VR training, then if an artist and a truck driver and a pilot and a pro racer can all learn in VR, then I feel like it's safe to assume that a cop and a soldier can too. The fact now that the sim companies are moving on from making only lethal force decision training to more common things like de-escalation scenarios and traffic stops, that's a move in the right direction in my opinion, if this stuff actually does work. Hopefully it opens this sort of platform up to be learned more about in the future. A short tangent, please, just, given world events. I think a topic on everyone's mind is law enforcement and how it's got some fucking problems right now. To me, personally, the most shocking shit is reading about how so many routine wellness checks end in fatalities for no good reason. One of my earliest childhood memories is actually of a police officer coming to my house late at night for that sort of thing, a type of wellness check. And it's incredibly upsetting to know of the unfairness that if I or my mom or my dad looked differently, then that could have been one of my last memories, Better training is often touted as a possible solution to the systemic issues prevalent in these forces, but I think that if they're really as ingrained as they appear to be, then that's not enough. These people get plenty of training, but what this training lacks, in my opinion, is accountability. I think what's a really cool opportunity uniquely afforded by a training solution rooted in technology is the data collection side. I don't think I need to explain why collecting information about how police officers behave in training scenarios is important, but given their comments, the company that makes this sim actually does this already to flag issues with performance. For example, monitoring where muzzles are pointed during missions to identify safety issues.
We can gather statistics. So, once you have 100 people doing the same scenario, we can actually draw conclusions from it.
We're looking to see where their muzzles are, no weapon safety issues.
Got 2 bodies in the floor in front of us, guys.
Almost all the scenarios that have been developed here are based on real incidents.
Shots fired.
With enough data on all the different officers and how they each behaved in a wide range of different scenarios, ideally you'd be able to pump that through some sort of analytics engine and generate reports or something,
Can actually hit statistics, and I'll show you where the gun was when it fired, the trajectory of the bullet, and whether it hit the suspect or not.
I think in the best case, this sort of feature could be used to uncover certain trends or biases among specific officers or teams before sending them out into the real world. This could be like the Google Analytics of police reform, maybe, if it's implemented properly. I've been in this sort of meeting where someone says, hey, before we commit to a design for our webpage, we're going to run a quick A/B test and measure how long it takes for someone to click the add to cart button if it's red versus if it's blue or something. And this is all very important because our Christmas bonuses depend on this campaign, right? I've been in that meeting. I've built that sort of A/B test before, That's the thing about having a lot of data, is you can make incredibly informed decisions with it. I'm imagining in best case a world where someone could go, hey, before we send out Officer Greg on this call, let's pull up his training analytics and check the reporting on how quickly he engaged suspects when they were black versus when they were white. Pull up an ad hoc report to estimate this guy's racial bias, see if he's got a negative trend. After all, people's lives are in his hands. You can keep pumping money into the sort of training these people are currently taking, but unless you get anything out of it that you can then measure or make decisions based on, I think that's a waste of time and money. This is a future application I hope to see as this technology inevitably fills more and more police departments around the world. This is a training platform and ongoing practice solution that can be used to measure trends in and hopefully control issues of officer misconduct. Discrimination in law enforcement is something that needs to be weeded out, but I don't see how training will help reduce it or its impacts unless it includes a layer of monitoring and control. Throw a guy through an IRL training workshop, great, but unless we know how he actually did and can use that information to potentially prevent him from responding to a call he better not to, then what's the fucking point? I mean, how many office workers take mandatory fucking password management training and still store all their keys in Word docs on their desktop, unless you can actually measure the results, there's no point. And look, it's important to admit that nothing stops this from being exploited or abused by the forces that use it. Like other technologies with law enforcement application, VR could very well be used by police to strengthen or to reinforce the stranglehold they already have on society. What I'm saying makes me very happy though is that so far that doesn't seem to be what's happening. Unlike other tech with an officer monitoring angle, departments are eager to use VR because they think it's cool, and they seem to genuinely want to improve their performance in a measurable and reportable way with it.
A very important part of the new training and a completely new training methodology that has emerged is the so-called debriefing, or after-action review. All the movements of each person, but also of the whole team, can be analyzed together, since the system shows everything relentlessly. In conventional, real training, the participants can only imagine this to a certain extent, or they can only remember what he or she has done. With simple software, you can review the scenario individually and at any time.
What's also a very big green flag, in my opinion, is that some departments have made conscious attempts to open it up and democratize it, something you can't really do on such a scale with traditional training. In New York, for instance, police have collaborated with ex-gang members and youth to develop a training program that aims to teach teenagers how to avoid joining gangs or how to behave during a police stop. I imagine input from community members is crucial to the effectiveness of something like this.
They go after the vulnerable people who know that they pretty much not doing nothing.
16-year-old Brian Scarrett explains gangs go after the kids on the street without a lot of plans. The dialogue is so realistic because it's written by young people, the way they would speak. These are young people who have stayed out of gangs, and they say the way to do it is be busy after school and on weekends.
It makes me really excited about the possibility of the influence going the other way, though, of people who are most impacted by discrimination in policing, who are most often on the opposite end of police encounters that go wrong, being able to have an advisory role in the level design of police training scenarios because of how quickly digital projects can be iterated on. For the first time, other members of the force aren't the only people who can cook up large-scale training programs. This tech could unlock the door for anyone to pop into the kitchen and add whatever kind of spice they want to the mix. I haven't seen anything like this yet, but the anti-gang recruitment program they're running in New York seems like a proof of concept for something that could eventually be like this. Many of these apps already have extensive scenario editors, so putting these Mario Maker-esque tools into the hands of the communities that these officers serve, letting everyday people vet or even play designer to these training sim stages, that's what I feel like we're on the verge of. And that'd be worth getting excited about, I think. Police training should be a two-way street, and I maybe naively hope that VR can be a stepping stone on the way to democratizing it. Anyways, maybe I'm irrationally optimistic about this sort of thing, given that I'm someone who, constantly works with applications that use data to make informed decisions, and that's great and all, but that's without even mentioning the incredibly interesting innovation of empathy training, VR scenarios that play out from two perspectives back to back, first as civilian, then as officer. In Canada, this sort of training, deployed via the Oculus Go platform, is being used to prepare cops for crises involving people with mental health issues, letting them step into the shoes of the people they confront before dropping them back in their familiar role as a responding officer. This is super fucking neat. One of the most interesting things about how VR is applied in military and police training is that, at least recently, the companies serving these programs are using standard, commercially available VR headsets rather than their own proprietary systems as used to be the case. Obviously, offloading the responsibilities of making and maintaining a state-of-the-art virtual reality headset to a vendor frees them up to focus on their real specialty, their software, their platform, their game. Would it be fair to call this a risk, though? If we're comfortable with the fact that the thing I've got hung up on my wall, that I play with, that is effectively a toy to me, is simultaneously being used by one of the most potentially volatile demographics, cops, to prepare for real-world encounters where deadly force might need to be applied, is it normal to not be vocally uncomfortable with the fact that another one of the most unstable and volatile demographics, gamers, are also using these devices, sometimes on the daily, to serve themselves violent and incredibly realistic power fantasies? I was about to say that joke is probably in bad taste, equating cops to gamers, but then I remembered how many people told me to kill myself because they didn't like my review of a SpongeBob game 4 years ago. Go fuck yourselves. Here's a fun little palate cleanser, though. Definitely not in any way an attempt to prime you for my next point. This is a Swiss project where 4 people with no prior aviation experience were able to perform a simple task in a real helicopter after only having practiced in a VR simulator. I thought the racing sim stuff was cool. This is fucking crazy, am I right? Wow. Better remember this for later. Last year I made a video asking the same question. Given that skills can be learned in virtual reality training programs and that modern violent VR games share the same interfaces and technologies as these industrial apps, is it a valid concern that people with less than good intentions could use this technology and leverage it in the same way cops, soldiers, pilots, receptionists, drivers, wait staff, and even artists are using it to get better at what they want to be better at? It's not a question of the simulators somehow being at a different level software-wise than the games. The biggest difference between Apex Officer, the cop training program I've been showing off so much of, and any VR shooting game on Steam is marketing. Apex is made with Unity, a game engine, and I'd be willing to bet it uses some pre-made bullet physics libraries from the asset store, the same that any number of games might use. They have a common DNA. Let me put it this way, if you wanted to work at a company like Apex Officer, you'd need games industry experience, not police experience. Is it a question then of hardware? Well, last year when I asked this question, I actually asked it to a lot of people, both experts in related fields and the public in their games of choice. A common theme among everyone's interviews was exactly this, that hardware was not close enough to reality yet for any meaningful skill transfer with firearms to occur. The fact that the two little Oculus manettes don't feel as heavy or produce any amount of kickback like a real gun, well, that was reason enough, according to all of my sources, to be able to put our minds at ease.
That are out on VR that involve guns aren't really realistic.
You see some of the military VR things, they have the guns and the vests and they can feel things and they're in like a giant room. They're actually moving, but I mean this is good for like a civilian sort of thing.
Dr. Wilson brought up the issues of motion tracking not always being perfect, weapons having no weight, and that a lack of force feedback being limiting factors to the transfer of skills. Yes, you can aim down sights, he says, but the guns have no weight and no kickback, and unrealistic things like auto-aim and auto-spread are still present.
And even this is not even close to what it's like in real life. So.
I mean, this is, I'm not disputing that VR is taking shit to the next level, but at the end of the night, this is a game.
Yeah. Shit.
That was one.
The fact that real-deal combat sims where skill transfer is explicitly the goal use modified weapons these days seems to corroborate this. That was all last year, and technically it was an examination that started the year before, so call it 2 years ago. This year, though, I am a bona fide VR influencer, and ProTube VR was gracious enough to send me one of their professional-grade MagTube gun stocks. Professional grade in the sense that this is what all of the VR esports athletes use.
I forgot to load my fucking gun.
I can't get my hands on defense or military-grade stuff like the cops are using, but I can get them on something like this, the consumer-grade version of a physical motion-tracked gun, one that strips away all unnecessary parts for ease of use and adaptability. With a few twists of an Allen key and calibration features that all the leading VR first-person shooter and military simulation games seem more than eager to implement, this funky, bendy carbon fiber stick can replicate grip and stock positioning of any in-game gun. The fact that it looks like a bad fucking case of scoliosis isn't worth docking at any. Remember now, when you put on your headset, you don't see it, neither your goofy controllers. You see your hands clinging to a rifle. Even though I'm about to make the case against things like this influencer stick on a larger scale, as someone who does personally enjoy these kinds of VR games on a regular, yet I hope responsible basis, holy fuck. It takes a little bit of getting used to popping the magnetic cups in and out, but the simple fact that you now have a third point of contact between your body and your virtual weapon, the crook of your shoulder, gives you so much more control. Also, it's a tiny detail, but having something that physically rests against your cheek as you aim down sights, a gentle amount of haptic feedback, and something you can see out of the gap under your nose lining up one-to-one with your virtual gun stock, it should be such an insignificant thing, and I'll be honest, I can't outright point to any instance of gameplay and say, that's the kill I only got because I pressed my cheek against the thing. I can't say that, aside from maybe some of my sniper kills, but freaking hell does it add something to the experience. I will say though that I think it's really neat that you can use it as a sort of shortcut to lining up the sight with your eye. Like, you don't have to fumble around with two controllers in open air until you can peep into your optics. You know that if you snap your cheek to the stock, you'll always have your aim. Over time playing it, you develop a reflex to do this, and it's really interesting to see that captured, I think. You might know that I'm a really big fan of reloading guns in VR. I've made a few little compilations demonstrating my acquired muscle memory before. I just think it's super interesting from a gameplay perspective more than anything, that reloading no longer being executed by a single button press makes it so that sticking to a single loadout and getting better and better at it is a good beginner strategy. Fucking, sometimes you run out of ammo so you gotta pick up an enemy's gun and shit, you don't know how to reload it. That is some engaging gameplay. Anyways, back to the tube. The absolute smoothness with which you can reload, all because you can still hold the gun steady between one hand and your shoulder while your other one reaches for a new cartridge. Going back to play without the tube in stock after experiencing this, I felt naked.
These are some really big sunflowers, huh? Watch out, behind you! Behind you, behind you, behind you.
That's the first time I had to admit that maybe I agreed with what everyone was telling me. That maybe with motion controllers alone, it's hard to translate the experience of holding a weapon to a degree that someone could learn something from it. Feeling this and feeling the difference it makes has started to convince me of that. Does it make the game feel more realistic? Absolutely. Does it make it more fun to play? I don't know if fun is the right word, but like, in the same way that racing sim aficionados will talk about the experience of forgetting they're not in a real car when they drive with a headset.
I found that with VR, I have moments when I forget I'm in the sim. I'm fully focused on driving and understanding how to be faster. And the tell for me is that I approach my driving in exactly the same way that I would in the real world.
Playing with this, I caught myself multiple times feeling like I was in something like a paintball match, my closest personal reference, forgetting at moments that this was still a game and that there were still rules I could break if I wanted to. Are there any drawbacks? Well, that's exactly it. There are certain advantages to be found in using just two lightweight controllers to play a game like this that you forfeit in exchange for the added immersion, realism, steadiness, and of course, clout. The only limitation in regards to realism that I found was in laying down. Because the stabilization stick needs to be able to support any frame of rifle, it protrudes from the empty space below where your gun would be. This unfortunately means that going prone and holding your weapon upright is an impossibility. But if you're like me and you're not afraid of doing some battlefield yoga, you can still aim and fire from the floor sideways. It just doesn't compare to something like this, which is me with two regular controllers actually laying down on the ground and taking shots from an upright gun. Their hand kind of forced by the VR market, which is constantly evolving and changing controller designs like a girl changes clothes. That's a Katy Perry reference, definitely appropriate in this kind of video, right? Anyways, point is the MagTube and their other products are designed with modularity in mind. If you want to lay down, there's a bipod attachment. Hey!
At this point in the video, which is at this point in editing the video, exactly at this moment, I would like to dedicate the next few seconds of your time to the fly that flew into my coffee that I was drinking while I was editing and died. So let it never be forgotten, the legacy of this fly, which died in this cup that I actually painted myself. It's a winter scene with just like piles of shit everywhere. Those were supposed to be pine cones, but when it dried, they kind of splooged out and it just looks like fucking scat. Anyways, the final resting place of this fruit fly.
Or if you want to take the sense of immersion a level further, you can replace your base stock with the Force Tube stock, a big motorized pad that punches you in the shoulder every time you fire and is already supported by most of the biggest shooting games in VR right out of the box. I love this product, both as someone who is super invested in VR and to whom it's a regular form of entertainment for, and as someone who is super interested in and worried about the impacts of virtual reality tech and needed basically something exactly like this to make the point that the consumer version of the physical gun peripherals actively being used by armed forces does exist. That the exact thing everyone said would need to exist before it was worth being concerned about does exist today. You can go buy it online. There's literally an affiliate link in this video's description. This stuff is here, it's in people's homes. It's in my home. Merci ProTube VR, eh? Now, is it super accessible? Not exactly. It comes at a very, very steep price, but that's because it's a very, very niche product. And yeah, there are plenty of cheaper knockoffs out there that I'm sure do a good enough job. But in my opinion, what sets this apart both as a gaming and immersive sim accessory is the adjustability, the modularity, and the magnet docks. These little cups and the fact that they have versions for every model of VR motion controller imaginable is a blessing. Their involvement as the official gun stock of VR esports holds them responsible to keep making new ones as necessary, meaning you don't have to worry about ever upgrading your headset and your controller's not working with your stick anymore. These guys are always going to have cups for you, and that unfortunately is not something you can hold any of the crafters on Etsy to. Then of course there's the fact that it can be bent and twisted in so many different ways. Every gun in every game is shaped moderately differently, and without this many points of adjustment, it could be impossible to grip certain rifles. This game is so bendy, I'd be hard-pressed to find a game and a gun that it didn't pair with. And yeah, then there's the modularity. The fact that this thing can be ripped apart at its joints and reconstructed with mods is super neat to me. This little recoil device already available today foreshadows, in my opinion, a slew of this kind of shit. I'm still very curious to see someone switch out the stock on this thing for a real gun stock or something, or stick a real bolt on the side for chambering sniper rifles. This thing is more of a platform for peripherals than just a plain gun stock, and the fact that all the games are jumping at the chance to support it makes me think modders will have more incentive to work with this than anything else. The promise, as I see it with a stick like this, is it'll get better. It'll improve with time just as VR does. There's already not much of a separation between this and the peripheral soldiers and cops are using, and in the future, I can only assume that gap will be tightened. This gun stock is so fucking cool, and it's been a real challenge not slam dunking this gameplay footage until this point in part 2 of this video. Oh god, what a feeling. Thank you ProTube VR for throwing me a bone to review, and also make a deeper point about. Which, to be fair, yes, they did ask me if I was willing to do just a product review or if I wanted to make a deeper, I believe the word they used was a philosophical point about it, and I did tell them that I was more interested in making a philosophical point about it, but I would, depending on how it worked out, I would feel fine integrating an honest product review into that. So I don't want anyone to interpret this as like me just like also slam dunking on a company. I'm really trying not to be an asshole. Like, I feel like they knew that I was gonna do this. Hopefully they're cool with this, and there is legitimately a link in the description if you want to check this thing out. This is really what I thought about it. I'm very happy I got the chance to work with them, and I love this thing. I'm really happy I got a chance to actually use it in this video rather than just talk about the fact that it exists. Really great opportunity. Anyways, sorry. This is the first time I've ever had anything like this happen to me in a video. This is the first time I've had any sort of not monetary incentive, because they just gave me the thing, and technically it wasn't free. I had to spend like $70 on import fees, but so it did cost me something at the end of the day. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully if this sort of thing ever happens again, I'll handle this a lot more gracefully. Okay, so why are we back here? Why are we talking about violence again? I'll admit, I'm a worrier, and I'm not done worrying about things. I love this technology, and yet I've been on a crusade against it for the last 3-4 years now, because I believe there is evidence to suggest that if misused or used with malicious intent, it could be a tool that helps someone prepare for some flavor of violent act. You're not gonna fucking believe this. It happened again. This is a different day. This is a different coffee cup. This is a different mug. Everything is what the what the fuck? It's full of coffee. I can't drink any of this coffee. Fucking, how am I supposed to make a fucking 40-minute fucking video? Oh no, it's more like 20. How long is this video? Fuck, how much longer do I have to do? Oh Jesus Christ, it is 40 fucking, god damn it. VR race car drivers are using recreations of real-world tracks to prepare themselves before they get there. Cops are rehearsing missions in environments modeled after real-world places where very bad things have actually happened. Research and practice have shown that people can learn real skills in virtual environments not too dissimilar to games. Like, they're made with game-making tools, they're played on game-playing hardware, they're fucking video games, point final. And there is evidence that navigating a virtual replication of a real-world place can give you an advantage when it's your turn to perform there, whatever your performance may be. This is a long shot because it's kind of the same thing, but not really. But one of my favorite things to do in VR is load up old Call of Duty maps, locations I visited before virtually, two-dimensionally, all throughout my teenage years. And now, being enveloped by them, being there in person, in a sense, having a lay of the land gives me an advantage. I've been here before. Maybe not in this form, maybe not with this much fidelity, but I've been here before and I know where to go, and I know how to shoot my opponents in this space. I have killed enemies here before in a way that is different to how I am doing it now, but that experience aids me. Here's another example. This is a digital recreation of the Dunder Mifflin office from the popular comedy series, The Office. For some reason, it's available for me to play a violent VR first-person shooter game in. Having watched the show legitimately gives me an advantage in that I know just about where everything is, where enemies could be hiding, where I could deke into for cover. And if I ever presented myself at this set, my experience in VR would further aid me in navigating it. Luckily, this is only a fictional office, but of course it's based on a real physical space. I'm not sure if I need to mention that it would take an equal amount of skill and effort for someone to recreate their own office for a game like this. If The Office were still running, you could probably imagine an episode where the cast has an awkward conversation with Dwight when they find out he's been playing violent VR games in a level he designed like this. And unfortunately, in addition to the on-brand cringe, the extra unsettlingness of a scene like that would be that none of that is impossible. Here I am, in The Office, with a gun. I think that if someone or some group wanted to, they could digitally recreate a location from their real world and, using many of these games' community tools, load it in. Much the same way people have ported all the old COD and Halo maps or brought real-world racing tracks to The Sims. And then I think someone, again who really wanted to, could get used to moving around this place and rehearse a violent act in it to the point that it would be hard to argue that it wouldn't give them a measurable advantage in their performance if they ever took their show live. Sorry for the ambiguous language here, it's the nature of the platform. These sorts of acts are often not spontaneous, but rather premeditated and planned, and aggressors have been known to practice beforehand. I'm not saying that VR games can make someone violent. Not yet, at least. What I'm saying is that someone who's violent and has access to this technology could gain some sort of advantage from leveraging it as part of their preparations, the same way non-malicious actors do in all sorts of other domains. Unfortunately, the police and military are not the only groups with something to gain from a platform that lets them practice, prepare, condition themselves, and hone their skills in applying lethal force in a scalable, customizable, safe, quiet, and cost-effective way before hitting the streets. I dread the day that instead of blueprints or schematics or a manifesto, an investigation into an individual or group responsible for such an event uncovers their fucking Steam Workshop page and their Oculus Rift hanging on their wall. I think if that ever happens, in addition to the expected damages, VR's reputation will be decimated. The media spotlight will be intense, hardware and titles will be put under strict control, and years of progress towards more engaging and immersive technology will be undone overnight. Still, none of this is news if you've heard me make my case before, so why am I back here retreading old ground? Well, partly because I thought reevaluating the argument was worthwhile. The fact that a lot of people citing VR's lack of tactile and haptic feedback as a defense only for me to get my hands on exactly that, I think validates my concern that this stuff isn't coming, it's already here. It'll only improve the longer we sit and watch it and do nothing. This thing is so fucking cool and I love the hell out of it, but if a clerk at Walmart has to card me, has to check my ID to unlock the shelf for the airsoft guns, then maybe not just anyone should be able to buy something like this online. The other reason we're back here though is because of a series of questions, askable many different ways. Can violent VR games make people violent? Can violent VR content be considered a contributing factor to someone's violent personality changes and trait aggression? And if so, should certain VR content be considered impermissible? Last year I started my video with a summary of the violence in video games discussion. Unluckily for me, 1 month after my video dropped, the American Psychological Association released an updated resolution on violent video games, basically a summary of their stance on it, which for the record hasn't changed. They doubled down, they reaffirmed. But the thing is, I feel like a lot of people think they know the accepted take on this, but are unaware of some of the nuance. The official stance is that video games are not a cause of violence. Most people know this. But based on research and according to the APA's 2020 resolution, violent video games have been shown to be linked to short-term aggressive behavior. If you go out and kill me and the news blames it on the fact that you play Super Smash Bros., the consensus is that they'd be wrong in doing so. But if Weinstein and Gavino kick your ass after your 20th try and you turn around and aggressively yank at what's left of my fucking hair, if I claim that the game was a contributing factor to your aggression, I believe that'd be in line with what's accepted. The nuance is that in psychology there's a difference between violence and aggression. I had it described to me this way once. What aggression is to violence is what weather is to climate. Aggression is simply one way that violence manifests itself. Just because it's raining today doesn't mean something's wrong with the world. Sometimes it just rains. But if there's a pattern, if it's been pouring for a week straight, then that might be sign of a higher level issue. The difference with games when compared to anything else that's linked with short-term aggression, other than like maybe traffic or something, is that there's something we consume on a regular basis. Gaming is sort of like choosing to make it rain on ourselves every day. That's not kink shaming, I promise. The APA's official stance kind of ends here, because evidence hasn't shown that violent games contribute to trade violence. The issue I have, though, is that other studies, unrelated necessarily to games, have suggested that frequent and regular exposure to stimulus, like a video game, that provokes short-term aggression may eventually lead to violent personality changes. If I force you to sit down for a couple of hours every night and spend your time opening shitty packaging, you know the kind I'm talking about, right? Like that sharp sealed plastic that you've got to cut and rip and peel, and then once you get through it, you've got like 20 twist ties to undo. You'll fuck that shit. But if I asked you to spend some time each day doing that, something that makes you feel incompetent and aggressive, it's suggested that you will become a fundamentally more violent person. If you went out on an all-out rampage, I would not be surprised. Yet again, an oversimplification, but just an example of something that may make you aggressive that is not media. Another well-researched phenomena that complicates things for games is the weapons priming effect. Since the late 1960s, basically it's been observed that human beings unintentionally exhibit increased aggressive behavior and thoughts in the mere presence of something they perceive as being a weapon, imagery included, such as that in a recruitment poster or in a video game. The closer the weapon is to being in the person's actual hands, the stronger the effect. It's been observed and measured that the presence or suggestion of a weapon automatically and naturally primes us for violence. Gaming peripherals like light guns have been studied in the past, and the results went the way we'd expect. This effect has been repeatedly replicated for decades, and no, video games are not immune to it. I talked a lot more about this in my past VR video, so if you're interested in learning more about that, I would point you there. In VR, we hold things that might not look exactly like guns, but that doesn't matter because our vision is overridden by the 3D display embedded within the fancy blindfold. The inoffensive clicks of the trigger-shaped buttons are masked by the sound of gunfire and of mechanical pieces clacking into each other, all playing through a built-in stereo headset and controlled by software that creates the illusion of spatial sound. And, especially with a peripheral like this, what with its weight and the 3 points of contact it makes with your body, it feels like you're holding a gun. When all of your relevant senses are being spoofed by technology to convince you of a gun, you are susceptible to the same ones that looking at or holding a real one would inflict. There is no reason that VR would be immune to the weapons priming effect. The APA's resolution makes it clear what the official stance is. Video games do not cause violence, they've only been shown to cause aggression. But where I take issue is with people taking this result and generalizing it to VR, blowing off the concern from the word go. And I'm sorry, but I'm calling bullshit. Anyone who's used this conclusion to deny VR the conversation I think is worth having about it is making a mistake. Because in the entirety of this 2020 resolution on violent video games and their psychological effects on people, written by the American Psychological Association, and in 18 of its 20 references, its supporting literature, which 2 are excluded because they're only available in print, and I'm not about to hike to a library in a pandemic just to check, but in this document and in its accessible first layer of references, there is not a single mention of VR. In this report, and in its ground layer of foundation, there isn't any discussion of headsets, of 3D head-mounted displays, of handheld virtual manipulators, of realistic customizable peripherals, or of anything else related to virtual reality systems. When I say that I am concerned that VR might have different impacts on us with respect to aggression and violence, I don't think that using any of the established video game-related stances to dismiss me is appropriate. Video games don't cause violence, okay, but VR is not like video games. In the ways that it affects us, in the ways that we respond to it, in the ways that it immerses us, in those ways and probably more, I believe that VR is a fundamentally different form of media than video games. I believe a line should be drawn between the two. There can't be so many differences in so many other domains, but then, hey, when it comes to video games, there's nothing to worry about. It's the same as video games. I don't think that makes sense. You show me a graffiti artist who made something with this, huh? Last time I ended the video on an optimistic note, honestly because I was afraid to not. How could I spend the whole video talking about dark subject matter and a literal VR murder simulator and not end with a shot of the goofy guy dancing around with the smoke grenades, you know? This time I won't be doing that. Also, you may have noticed that this time the video is void of expert opinions or interviews. Yeah, that's not a mistake. I didn't want to be held accountable to by anyone else's credibility, which, yeah, is a reason that you should consider this video much less credible than the last. There's no authority here other than my own. You know, part 1 is just a fun little tech narrative piece, and part 2 is an abrupt twist into a controversial opinion essay written by some dude who's had his finger on the pulse of this issue for the better part of 4 years, but still just some dude. Alright, what are we doing? Oh, that was a...
Nice. Nice. Very good.
Yeah, sorry, bro. Just checking you got your sunglasses on, yeah?
Yeah.
Look, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not even a great writer. I'm a technologist. I'm someone who's meant to reason about and build things, systems, and their parts. I'm not someone who's supposed to feel so strongly about anything. What this means, though, is that I'm allowed to disrupt and demand change or verification without grounds. I can be a little bit of an asshole, but I think that sometimes these disruptions of the comfortable norm lead to the discovery of new truths. I realize that I am getting dangerously close to the vernacular of like an anti-vaxxer or a conspiracy theorist, but just hear me out for a second. I'm allowed to say whatever the fuck I want about things, especially technology. Real professionals are not. So while I may not be held to the standards of an order, I still feel like I have a duty to speak up if it's to do with something I believe is or could be a cause of harm to society. I did still take an oath though, or maybe I joined a cult. I don't know. There was a smoke machine. It didn't feel very professional. And I'm here saying that I believe that this is the faulty material I promised not to henceforth suffer or pass or be privy to, if what it's meant to do is support the argument that violent VR content isn't worth worrying about. There are no mentions of VR in here. This is the wrong source to cite for this counter-argument. This is the wrong set of gloves to don if you're going for the knockout. I have zero authority to take a shit this big, but I don't think, even from a non-expert like myself, that this is such a radical position to take. In summary, I'm saying, hey, I'm worried VR could cause violence, and people are telling me, hey, don't worry, video games don't cause violence, and I'm saying, okay, great, but VR is not like video games, and here's evidence. To make this crystal clear, because honestly I'd love to be challenged on this, but what I'm arguing here is really two parts. First is the part where I'm saying that consuming violent content in VR could, unlike traditional media, contribute to violent personality shifts. Where I'm sourcing this argument from is evidence that VR affects us differently or more powerfully than other media, comparable to real experiences, evidence that the real first and second-hand experiences with weapons or even photographic depictions of them are known to increase aggression through a cognitive priming effect, and the suggestion that regular or maintained exposure to conditions that elicit violent or aggressive thoughts for long periods of time could be a factor that contributes to the development of a violent personality. The second part really doesn't matter as much, it's just for fluff, but combined with the first, it makes this a double whammy. It's the part where I'm saying that real skills transferable to the real world can be learned and honed in VR if the simulation and feedback are accurate enough. On its own, this isn't necessarily bad. We've seen how various industries have leveraged this for positive outcomes like increased safety and whatnot. But considering part 1, basically what I'm saying is that in playing violent VR games that commit to a certain level of realism, players who may be slowly developing violent tendencies could be simultaneously learning real skills and conditioning themselves for real scenarios that they may find themselves in. Just like pilots, just like cops, just like the boxers and graffiti artists, VR can be used as a tool to train or rehearse for something real. The problem lies in if that tool might have an unintended side effect given how human beings experience immersive violent content. When a video game player can experience and partake in an act of shooting or war fighting with the same level of fidelity as a painter can in a simulation of their craft, we should maybe be concerned. Because if a player can't learn violence in a sim, then please explain to me why can a painter, why can a race car driver, why can a musician or a pilot or a police officer? What's the difference between this and this? Because even when the companies behind these sorts of virtual combat simulators speak up about how effective their tools are, the reasons they cite aren't unique to them. They're applicable to games too.
The familiarization to the virtual world happens extremely fast. This also applies to resources. After a few seconds, you forget that you are only holding a generic weapon in your hand. The sensory delusion mentioned in the form of this immersion, the immersion in the virtual world, makes the training very effective. Emotions are generated, and the participants experience realistic stress. Studies have shown that constant repetition and realistic stress are the best preparation for serious operations.
Now, the second part I think is a lot harder to argue with because, like I said, on its own, it's not necessarily bad, and there's a wealth of research and application backing it up. The first part is where I think someone who knows a lot more about human psychology and tech could probably poke some holes. But the way I see it, you'd have to pull out one of my 3 Jenga blocks here to dismantle this. Either we need evidence that VR doesn't actually affect us differently than other media, or that the weapons priming effect is actually wrong, something that would invalidate a lot of existing research, or, and personally this is where I think the argument's easiest to hit from, but we need evidence that long-term exposure to stimulus that makes us think and act aggressively does not have any impact on the development of our personality. And just to throw this out there, but a comment I've gotten a lot is, oh, well, maybe VR games can just be a safe way for people to let their anger out instead of doing it in reality. The thing is, that's not actually how this works. The idea that it could be helpful to just let your anger out is called catharsis theory, and it's also the basis of the business model of all those pseudo-therapeutic break room type places. You've probably seen them advertised before, especially if you live in a city. It's a place where you make an appointment and they let you into a room with a bunch of smashable plates and furniture and shit, and they hand you a stick or like a baseball bat or an axe to swing away with and let off some steam. It's kind of ridiculous and excessive, and not only is this not scientifically sound, but research attempting to prove this theory has actually exposed that the opposite is true. Ruminating in and acting on anger or aggression as an attempt to vent or diffuse them actually increases them. As it turns out, anger and aggression lead to more anger and aggression. The best way to deal with angry feelings is either to distract yourself or to do nothing at all. So for that reason, I think it would be inappropriate to believe that the long-term impacts of acting out violence in VR would be therapeutic instead of potentially harmful, personality-wise. The main thing to take away, though, is that I think there's sufficient evidence to suggest that any knowledge or learnings about traditional media and the way it impacts us is out the window when it comes to VR. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. We can't take for granted that everything we know about games is applicable to VR. Virtual reality obviously is a form of media, but in the way you consume it, it's kinda not. You interact with it by looking at things and by moving your head and hands, and in a realistic sim, there's no other interface shit in the way. You're just sort of in an approximation of a space. I'm gonna make a really dumb point here, but I don't know if it's fair to call that sort of experience quote-unquote consuming media, unless standing on a field playing a sport is also consuming media. I think honestly it's a case-by-case thing, both for specific games and specific people who might be more or less susceptible to the immersive tricks going on in VR. But if a game is realistic enough, and if you're using some peripheral to extend that, if you're able to forget about the outside world, even momentarily, then I don't think anything we know about how people consume media applies to what you're going through anymore. So that's my argument. Part 1, VR violence might make people violent, and Part 2, those same people might be arming themselves with real violent skills in the process. And congrats for knowing that violent video games don't cause violence, but that might not matter here. That's what's scary. Look, technologists often get a bad rap for handling things a little bit backwards. We build things and then see if people will use them in the ways we assume they'll use them, and then measure their performance, and then figure out where things go from there. We shoot first and then ask questions. Sometimes our shot changes things in a really big way, though. Sometimes the whole world relies on a faulty system and it's too late before we realize it. We make a site for sharing dumb messages with your friends, and then it becomes a platform for political propaganda and election scandals and brainwashing your grandma. We build a digital currency system that lets people in countries with oppressive regimes transact safely and anonymously, and then it becomes a tool for money launderers and an environmental threat. And the scary thing is that for those systems, I don't think anyone could have predicted where they ended up heading. With VR, though, we can. We're watching it happen. Will someone ever prepare themselves for an act of violence with this technology? Yes. They're doing that as we speak. This guy's doing it. So is this guy. And all these guys? Yeah, they're doing it too. I love virtual reality. I think this tech can do amazing things. But I don't want to see it abused, and I don't want to see it die. When the builders of these sorts of systems and the content that's played on them fail to sit down first and consider the consequences of their work, things can balloon out beyond their control. I think awareness needs to be raised about the ethical issues facing VR. If there's anything I can do to support that, I will. And I hope you might as well. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing.
Dude, our guy's getting shot up there. Dude, you need help? Okay, I'm coming up to help you, dude. Hey man, what's up? What happened?
Fucking like 10 of them just came around the corner.
More. Alright. Let's go forward a little bit.
Hold on, let me make sure it's safe. Yeah.
Sue's just standing right where I'm supposed to be walking. Fuck
You're
you.
back. You're back. I'm out of syringes though. I think that's everyone. That's everyone.
Take a syringe, G.
Thank you.
No, I was giving my syringe because you helped me out.
Thank you, my dude. Yeah, we're good. We fought a bunch of fucking guys.